Welcome back to the Convo Couch, everyone. I am Pasta Jardula, and Johnny Sue is sitting over there spinning on those ones and twos. And in the studio with us today, well, not in the studio, but on the show, I always make the mistake. On the show, we have a special guest, a guy I kind of look up to when I started this business. I love his Twitter. It's mad crazy. He once worked for TYT. Michael Tracey's in the house. How you doing, Michael?
I'm doing pretty well, I guess, considering that we're in the middle of a global pandemic and I'm at the epicenter. But, other than that, things are okay.
You mean for a political junkie like yourself to stay at home and just sit there, read, go online, tweet all day? This is not like heaven
torture.
for you?
It's torture. No, it's sort of bizarre. It's sort of ironic because my daily schedule really isn't interrupted all that much, whereas most of the country has had their lives upended. For me, it's just like I'm still, writing for online publications and tweeting and YouTube and all the normal stuff I typically do. And ironically, there's actually an added level of convenience because the parking regulations around me are suspended.
See, there you go. And for me, I realized that I got an issue, that I love this quarantine too much. I get to stay at home, talk politics, do as many shows as I can, cook, eat, and rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
So for me, after this thing clears, I know, right? It's so bad. It's like I'm loving this in a way, but
Yeah, it's like the Larry David mindset.
Nice. So let's talk a little bit about your history too, real quick, because like I said, starting off in this business, I'm one of those guys who has some college. I was educated in my profession, in the restaurant profession, and I was a front of the house trainer, and I sort of learned how to become a teacher of sorts in the restaurant business. But when I started this particular business, I never really had a background in journalism. I didn't have a college degree. I went to 2 years of college. I had some college. And I really looked up to people like yourself who really knew how to express themselves. So give us a little insight to how you got started in this whole thing, maybe a little bit about your journey through TYT, and why you left them and why you ended up doing your Han Solo thing. Go right ahead.
Yeah, so I never dreamed of being a, quote, journalist or in the media as a child or anything. It was just sort of the trajectory that I found myself on, because I was somebody who at an early age was interested in politics, interested in debate. I had a proclivity for writing, and all that kind of meshed together into something that I could utilize for professional purposes, I guess. Or even saying professional is a little odd because I don't really feel like a professional at all. And in fact, journalism and media, as embodied by someone like you, should be open to everybody who can do stuff that people derive value from. So there shouldn't be this professional credentialing process. That said, I do think there is value in having gone through some of the rigors of journalistic training, and not even formal training necessarily, but working at a magazine, writing for newspapers, doing things like that makes you a little more grounded in factual veracity, making sure that all your claims are tethered to evidence that you can cite in a way that I think is sometimes missing on some of the online commentary, especially on YouTube. Even though I get a lot out of what YouTube commentators do, I'd like to see it meshed with a little bit more of a high journalistic standard. And, I get that some of those worlds are inaccessible in terms of elite journalism to a lot of people, but at the same time, you can write for local. I mean, I've written for local publications years ago, where there is a similar expectation of fidelity to facts and things that you can prove, and your quotes have to be right, your I's have to be dotted, your T's have to be crossed, all that. But YouTube, it's just sort of open season, right? So it's like it's not as anybody really checking anything. But especially when you have a byline, right? You kind of lie awake at night wondering, did I get everything correct? Was there a fact that I got wrong, a figure, a quote, etc.? So I think it instills in you an insistence on adhering to to factual, empirical reality that I think would be kind of salutary for people on YouTube to also abide by to some extent. But I did graduate from a 4-year college.
Where?
In New Jersey. It's sort of
Rutgers?
No, it's called the College of New Jersey,
Oh, okay.
which is a public liberal arts school
Okay.
in New Jersey. Sort of like it's in the same sort of system as Rutgers, but a little less well known. But it was a pretty good deal actually.
Football scholarship?
No, not a football. No scholarship. I think there actually was a football team, but I can't remember ever interacting with anybody.
Do you remember what the mascot was? The New Jersey College?
Oh, geez.
Philly
I think they were just the Lions.
The Lions. Got it.
The lamest mascot ever, had nothing to do with anything.
Got it.
But yeah, I mean, one thing, I was just involved in the political world. I knew I was interested in argumentation, debate. I was, studying political science, philosophy. And so what I did, I just started my own publication because the newspaper on the campus was terrible. They all hated me, kind of like how a lot of people in the media hate me now, because I actually hold them to account.
They don't hate you. They just don't understand you. You know what I'm saying?
Maybe.
I remember when I first got to meet you in New Hampshire, it was like, I was like, holy shit, there's Mike Tracey over there. I get to finally meet him. And, you're just a quiet, humble guy, whatnot. And the funny thing about it is you in person, it's a little bit different than you behind the camera. When you're on camera, you're owning it. You're controlling it. You're butting in. You're doing your thing. So to see you in person, it was like kind of cool. It's like, oh man, Michael Tracey is such a humble guy. He's cool. He's easy to go talk to.
Oh yeah, it's good to hear that. It's funny when people know you from your online persona, and maybe persona isn't even the right word because it implies that you're doing it for affect or you're doing it just to have a shtick, which I genuinely do not. Like, if I wanted to have a shtick, I would be like a sketch comedy actor or something. Like, that's not my MO.
Yeah.
But if you're engaging in public commentary and journalism and just in this field, and you communicate in ways that are seen as acerbic, right, or as forceful, or as unsparing, and people are going to infer from that it says something about your own personality in a way, and just in terms of how you treat people on a personal level.
Yeah,
like you're nasty to people, you're mean to them, and that's just not really the case for me. Like, I pretty much get along with everybody, and try not to put myself on any kind of pedestal that I don't, because I don't really deserve one in the first place. But you got to try to stay humble, and it's not as though I'm like filthy rich by doing this or anything,
No, I hear you. Yeah, I just think that's when you get in your own arena, when you get into your space, that you just become that Michael Tracey that gets into political argumentation. So how did you end up at TYT, and what happened over there?
Well, I mean, so I had been in the journalism media world in one form or another since 2010. Mostly freelancing, having various arrangements with different publications. Not the most lucrative thing in the world. But I had built up a fairly expansive resume or CV in terms of just writing for a lot of different publications across the political spectrum.
Yeah.
The one thing that I always set out to do was not get siloed ideologically, where I'm only communicating to a certain faction of people, right, who already agree with me.
Yeah.
And so part of the way to not get pigeonholed is to make a special effort to participate in dialogue across partisan and ideological divides.
Yep.
I had been doing that. And then in 2016, I got, for whatever reason, a little bit more notoriety just on social media. Started doing my own kind of rudimentary YouTube shows where I would just have a one-on-one discussion like this with people, nothing fancy. And just continued writing for publications. I was a columnist for Vice, and that got me a fair amount
Yeah.
of notoriety, I guess. I mean, it wasn't that big of a deal. It's not that I was like in this cool Vice clique or anything. I was just one guy who wrote for Vice.com every week or two, So it's like, um, so I did that. People felt that I had a little bit of a different analysis of what was going on in 2016 than was the norm.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been talking, I had seen signs early on that Trump was better positioned to win than people had thought. I think retroactively now, a lot of people like to claim that they thought that Trump was always going to win, but at the time, I can tell you it was a fairly fringe view.
Yeah, yeah. I thought he had
Um,
no shot. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But part of that stemmed from the fact that I made a point to go out and travel around as much as possible. And so in 2016, in like October, I did my first sort of crowdfunding exercise through GoFundMe. Got a much bigger reaction or response than I had thought I was going to get from people who funded me to go around to, you know, the key states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, North Carolina. And so, I tried to report firsthand on some of the key demographics that I thought were going to be integral to the election outcome. And I had a Medium page that I used and just wrote for pretty much daily. And then I was also writing for different newspapers and magazines and stuff. And for whatever reason, I got a fair amount of increased exposure.
Yeah.
And out of the blue one day, I got a call from Cenk.
I was gonna say, when did Cenk give you the call? He gave you a call,
Yeah,
right?
I think it was I was in DC for Trump's inauguration. Just to sort of be a spectator and to cover it journalistically or just to be there,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's just
To do
interesting.
what we do.
Yeah, just interesting. That's where you would want to be just as a citizen and a journalist, right? At that time.
Yeah.
I think it was the day before, uh, so January 19th, 2017, he called me out of the blue
Yeah.
and offered it
How
to
long
me.
did you work for them for? You worked for about 2 years for him? Or
I think it was a little over a year and a half.
yeah.
And
What happened? Because it seemed like you were so ripe for uh, an independent media network like TYT, and I remember you the whole Maxine Waters thing. I loved it. It was like, wow, man, like, he just got in there and asked Maxine. I know she wasn't expecting that the way she acted and everything, but it just seemed like you were so ripe and so perfect for TYT. Was it your decision to leave, or was it more the network, or?
well, I mean, in terms of the Maxine Waters episode, I took so much crap for that there's definitely a way. I mean, I should have communicated the exchange a little more carefully, so I wasn't leaving myself open to bad faith misinterpretation. But I stand by the questions that I posed to her
You
because
should.
the event that we were at was in Los Angeles,
You should.
called March for Truth,
Yeah.
where she was helping to perpetuate a lot of the totally bogus claims around the Russian interference, Robert Mueller stuff. She was inveighing against WikiLeaks and Assange and just participating in that whole hysteria. So the
Yeah.
questions I actually have were legitimate, but nobody really listened to the questions because they just liked the drama of me and her, and it's like a face-off or something. When it really was just me at a public event asking her if she
Yeah.
would agree to an interview, and she agreed. And then she
You know something, Mike? I got to tell you, for me, it really pointed out the hypocrisy within the Democratic Party. It was like you could see how hypocritical they are. And when you asked the question, it was like, hey, Obama with the same kind of behavior. Do you have any thoughts on that? And the way she just used the same scare tactics. Oh, you're just another Obama hater right now. How dare you say these things and take off? To me, it really just shined a light on the hypocrisy that was the Democratic Party.
And then she went on Joy Reid's show, I think the next day, and said that I was just some kind of right-wing provocateur.
That's what they do.
Or if you actually listen to the question, she thinks anybody who's ever going to ask her an adversarial question has to be just like the most retrograde Fox News stooge, because that's all she knows, really, in terms of people who might challenge her on things.
Yeah.
But that's obviously was not my motivation at all. But it didn't register to her. Um, eventually the TYT just sort of they restructured. So a lot of people who had been with them for a while left it around the same time I did. I felt that it was while I did get a lot out of the experience, and they gave me a fair amount of latitude to do what I wanted. At the same time, I kind of wanted to own the stuff that I did, if at all
Yeah.
possible. Build up my own sort of systems for generating revenue that were sustainable in the long term.
It wasn't a political ideology, was it? That's what I'm trying to get at.
No.
So it wasn't like he's not anti-Trump enough.
I mean, we definitely had disagreements, but the disagreements were generally made in good faith, and sometimes that would even go and debate them, and we'd have the conversations about it. So no, I mean, they never tried to stifle me in a political sense.
Yeah.
No. So I give them credit for that. And no, it was purely logistical stuff rather than political stuff.
Did they try to make an offer to keep you, to retain Michael Tracey? Because I mean, I know if I was an owner of a job, I'd be like, hey, well, listen, Mike's wants to leave. Let's give him a few more dollars to make it a little bit more comfortable and stay. Did they try to retain whatsoever, or was this just a situation like, hey, this is not a good relationship, let's just go on our way?
No, it wasn't like that. I mean, I don't want to get too into the nitty gritty of the details, but there's nothing there's nothing really dramatic about it. Honestly, it was just kind of pretty organizational stuff. Gotcha. And I have I got a lot out of the experience. They invested in trying to build up an independent journalism network, and you could argue as to whether it was effective or ineffective, but they actually did make an effort to do that. They tried to fund it, and one of the issues with the Young Turks is that it's so heavily intertwined with Cenk as a persona.
Yeah,
that people didn't really have a understanding that it was also that TYT was also a network. TYT network was what I worked for, right? So it wasn't Cenk individually, but it was hard to kind of explain to people what the difference was because it's such an outsized personality. And that's also, to his credit, he built up a big media organization on that basis. So I don't begrudge him for it at all.
I think you got to give credit where credit's due, for sure. So, yeah. So what are your thoughts on Bernie Sanders suspending his campaign?
Well, I think that the rationale he spelled out for why he suspended his campaign was actually sound, because he wasn't running on he wasn't competing for the Democratic nomination now for at least several weeks. I think ever since the March 17th primaries, where he got blown out in Illinois, Florida, and Michigan. No, sorry, Illinois, Florida, and Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
That's really when the deal was sealed, and there was no way to even argue that this was a remotely competitive process anymore. Really, I think the primary was officially over the prior week when he got blown out by a huge margin.
Super Tuesday. Yeah.
Well, no, not Super Tuesday. The week after Super Tuesday with Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, Washington, Idaho.
Super Tuesday 2.
Right.
Sorry.
Right. Super Tuesday part
2. Part duh.
I don't even like to call it Super Tuesday. I call it Stupid Tuesday. Because why do we have to have this pundit term for a day on which elections are held? It's so ridiculous. But once he lost every county in Michigan.
Yeah.
In a one-on-one with Biden. So you couldn't blame it on Warren at that point. You couldn't blame it on some kind of convoluted electoral scenario not working out in his favor. It was just a pure one-on-one, him and Biden. And he loses Michigan, gets fewer votes than he had got in 2016. Every county is won by Biden. So even the county in which Ann Arbor is located, so massive college towns, he loses. At that point, the rationale for the campaign is kind of evaporated. Yeah. So it wasn't a scenario like 2016 where Bernie was doing surprisingly well. So the argument for him going all the way through, contesting every primary, even going to the convention was sound, because he needed to, because that allowed him to build up leverage. So if you're campaigning in every primary, you got to build a campaign organization in each state or territory, right? You got to develop networks.
Yeah.
Organizationally, in terms of activists, in terms of media allies. That's what he was doing in 2016, and that's why he ended up becoming such an influential political figure. So, going all the way through, but he was also winning states in 2016. He was winning Michigan, surprisingly. He was winning Wisconsin. He was winning relatively big caucus states by significant margins, like Washington, where he lost this time when it was a primary, like Minnesota, which he lost this time when it was a primary, like Maine, which he lost this time when it was a primary.
Okay, well let's stay right there, because I get the gist of what you're saying there, and I don't mean to interrupt you and stuff like that, but I know you're not a big fan of election rigging, or you don't necessarily believe that's the number one reason why Bernie lost to Biden. At the end of the day, me personally, Fiorella personally, I can't speak for, she's not here right now. We know that Bernie made some serious mistakes throughout his whole campaign. However, we believe that the election rigging is the number one reason why Bernie Sanders has lost to Joe Biden, via the exit polls, via those reasons, like you said, Washington, Minnesota. He won the caucuses, but this time he lost the primary. What are your thoughts, your general thoughts on why Bernie lost to Biden?
See, I just don't accept that hypothesis in terms of election rigging, because there's no evidence for it, or at least not anywhere near enough evidence that is satisfactory to me to believe such grand claims. In terms of the caucuses, it's pretty clear why Bernie lost those states in 2020. It's because they converted from caucuses to primaries. Caucuses are party-run affairs where turnout is much lower, because in order to even know what a caucus is, you have to be a relatively engaged voter. You have to be familiar with the somewhat arcane intricacies of how a caucus works. And probably you're going to be somebody who, to put it this way, caucus states privilege organizational prowess. So Bernie's campaign had a very strong activist following who could make it such that his supporters were going to turn out for caucus states. That's why he won Nevada by a big margin this time. Nevada was a caucus. If Nevada was a primary, I don't know, maybe he would have won narrowly, but it wouldn't have been as big of a blowout. Yeah. So there's nothing conspiratorial to me about states choosing to convert from caucuses to primaries. In fact, Bernie argued for states transitioning to primaries because it was a more inclusive process, which is ironic because caucuses are much better suited to him, because if you have left-wing activists who are all on board for Bernie and they know the terrain, they know how to get people out to a relatively obscure event like a caucus, it's going to make it much more likely that he wins those states and gets delegates. Yeah. So really the more explanatory factor is that Bernie's prognosis of what the electorate would look like was just not accurate. A lot of people did turn out to vote in these states, but they were not, proportionally speaking, Bernie voters. And that's just the reality. That's what the Democratic Party is in the Trump era. So then rather than coming up with these convoluted, unsubstantiated theories about election rigging, which again, if you got evidence, send it to me. And some random website is not evidence. I mean, that website that I keep getting bombarded with is not legitimate. Okay. Give me something legitimate and I'll look at it. But
what website are you talking about?
I don't even want to give the name because it doesn't deserve the attention. But there's one website that's propagating the exit poll theory that people constantly cite.
Here's my theory, and hear me out on this one now, because I know we can probably agree on a lot of things that Bernie Sanders did wrong with his campaign, whether it be, the Russiagate, echoing, not, speaking out for Tulsi to get her on the stage, called Joe Biden and his friend, even his overall campaign strategy. I think you said he wasn't aware of what the electorate would look like, more of the social justice kind of fight, and rather than stick to the class issues and the workers and the money issues. I think that overall sentiment really hurt him. But here's the thing I'm getting at right now, because this is the area where it's my wheelhouse. is that I can't prove to you it's rigged, Mr. Tracey, but you can't prove to me it's not rigged. You know why? Because in the 50 states that we have these voting machines and these counting machines, they all have proprietary software. So if anything, the progressives, Bernie Sanders, his biggest sin is not fighting for transparency. And when we have publicly funded elections, we should have open source software. So that's why I do look at those exit polls, whatnot, but the whole system as a whole is really, really broken. And when you see, not only do you have the rigging, the election fraud of fixing the counting, and once again, like I said, you can't look at it, I can't look at it, it's closed software, it's proprietary software, but we also have the suppression tactics, because I think you would agree with me, Michael, when I say that the early voting always favors the more moderate, conservative candidates. You know what I'm saying? The late voting always favors the more liberal to progressive. The Bernie bros, the hipsters, they kind of show up late. The younger people, they got so much going on in their lives, they show up late.
I mean, those are California, right? I mean, the early votes skewed to Bernie in California.
I wouldn't say so at all. I mean, we don't have any numbers on it because you're not supposed to look at those numbers beforehand. But generally, most of your mail-in votes, your older people are more conservative. And they're going to vote. The early voting would have gone to Biden. I mean, there's a whole other issue in California right now.
Okay, well, let me just say this, right? So you can't prove a negative, right? I can't prove to you that there is no invisible moon made out of cheese orbiting the Earth right now. I can't prove to you that that's not there. But if you're saying that is there, you got to prove it to me, right? So
yeah,
I can't prove to you that there was no election rigging, but I'm not the one making the affirmative claim. If you're claiming that there was election rigging, you got to prove that. It's like
absolutely.
I can't prove to you that God doesn't exist. But
yeah.
You got to if you're making the claim that God does exist, the onus is on you to prove that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right?
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, are there transparency issues with some of this proprietary software? Sure, but in a state like Michigan, for example, it's all paper ballots, and it's all subject to audit. I mean, a lot of this rhetoric sounds to me like what the Hillary people said after the 2016 election, where they were saying, "Prove to me that Russia didn't hack the voting booths." Well, it's like, no, you got to prove that. You're making the claim.
Okay,
coming on me to prove it.
Well, let me push back on that, because I hear you. You know what I'm saying? But they didn't have any substantial evidence to connect the dots to Russia. Whereas if the moon made out of cheese, I have cheese droppings on the planet because I have these exit polls that are so obscure, you know what I'm saying, that are so out of whack that in a country like Bolivia, where the OAS stood behind saying we have to overturn it, it's almost double in the States.
It's not, though. I mean, again, that figure, and I don't want to even cite the name of this website, which is putting out this claim because it doesn't deserve it. It's perpetuating a fraud in my mind. But that figure you just cited was not right. The exit polls were not off. The exit polls were firmly within the margin of error. And people don't like to hear that for some reason because it furthers this paranoid vision they have about the American electoral process. Look, I'm paranoid about many aspects of the media, about the political system writ large, about the nefarious influence of various ill-motivated actors on the political system. That doesn't mean that I automatically spring into every lazy conspiracy theory about the political system, because it distracts you from understanding what the real sources of power are and how to identify the true problems that exist. So the exit poll stuff is not right. The exit polls, and if you want to get into the science of polling, there's a way to go learn about it and understand the reality, which is that in 2016, right, the electorate shifted. Sorry, in 2020, the electorate shifted fairly substantially compared to 2016. So the nature of the Democratic primary electorate was different. It grew. Different demographics participated than in 2020 than in 4 years ago. So yeah, you're going to have error in the initial samplings that you get right when polls close. That's why they weight the samples differently as more data comes in. So if you go look at the actual exit polls at the end of the night, rather than arbitrarily deciding to look at it and then use weird numerical tricks to exaggerate the discrepancies, then you'll find that the exit polls were roughly accurate within a reasonable margin of error. So this whole thing about how the UN would have to intervene, it's just not right mathematically, and it's getting a lot of people really worked up. And I fear that that's going to disincentivize them from really taking a hard look at the real reasons why Joe Biden won the nomination and Bernie Sanders lost it. If you get mired in this exit poll stuff, you're wasting a lot of energy.
Well, I'm not just mired in the exit poll thing. I'm an election integrity activist. I, study elections. I, follow the whole LA election. We went to meeting after meeting. We've counted provisionals. We've caught the whole situation. Let me ask you a question. What was the motive or the motivation for the Democratic Party? Because maybe here's something I'd like to kind of get out there, that there's a sense of, and my question was, what was the motivation for the Democratic Party to throw the Russiagate stuff in front of us, right? You know what I'm saying? More of like a distraction, right? To take away from their problems themselves. So you got this kind of like negative, nefarious group in front of you trying to persuade something. It's the same thing in the elections. Why do you think that there were 8 new systems in all the major cities around the United States when it came to their voting system, whether it be New California, Los Angeles, Texas, Michigan, Washington? And the reason why they do this is because it causes long lines. It causes delays. They want to suppress that late vote. Couldn't that be, brought into the sense of, hey, man, they're really trying to hide stuff. They're really trying to suppress things. Isn't it a little bit of a red flag to see 8 new systems go up and before your very own eyes that they knew were going to fail, even though people were telling them, hey, this system's going to fail?
It's not clear to me that whatever motive might have guided the transition to those new voting systems, and I'll take your word for that. I don't have the specific details in front of me, but like, for example, would Detroit be one city where they moved to a new system? Do you know? You said
I'd have to look. I have to look at my paperwork. I don't think that Detroit went to a new system. I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up.
Okay, but let's say like there are some like in like big cities.
LA was a new system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look, I just don't think the county clerks in LA County or the sort of apolitical election officials are really that interested in taking down Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, one problem is that a lot of Bernie supporters really overstate the extent to which Bernie was a threat to establishment interests. He was to a degree. Right, but there's a reason why Bernie gets along so well with Joe Biden. There's a reason why he's on good terms with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, even Barack Obama. There's a reason why, for that brief window when he was leading the national polls in February, why you saw some angst from the donor class, right? That's to be expected. But it's not like you saw a concerted, coordinated denunciation by the top officials in the Democratic Party. Like I'm talking about Obama, Pelosi, Schumer, Harry Reid, John Lewis, Jim Clyburn, right? They're not, I think they would have been rather accommodating to Bernie if he had the strategy that could have made his plurality into a majority. He didn't have the right strategy, and he also had a lot of substantive problems. And you mentioned a couple, meaning the Russiagate pandering. I think there are ways he could have made himself more appealing to like mainstream quote unquote Democrats, rather that didn't entail jumping on board the Russiagate and impeachment bandwagon. Because anybody who was concerned principally with those issues was never going to be a natural Bernie supporter anyway. All it did was alienate people who might have otherwise voted for Bernie. And most notably, the rural working class vote, which saw support for Bernie Crater in 2020 compared to 2016. So, if you could find me evidence, right, of some election official in LA County who's scheming, saying, look, we're going to take specific initiatives to disadvantage Bernie Sanders in LA County. First of all, didn't he win LA County? So,
he did, but not by the margin he should have won it by. You know,
What's
I
the
mean, he
margin?
could have really wrapped this thing up over here. I mean, I don't want to cite the polls again, but, you know, Biden didn't have a poll bigger than 12% out here. He didn't campaign. He didn't have any offices. He didn't go to either one of the Democratic conventions in California. That's how much he's hated out here. And, you know, I don't, Michael, I know it's really hard to prove these things, but do you believe that the Democratic Party can't throw, if they wanted to, an efficient and transparent election that would be very, very open to people, easy to people, accessible? I mean, do you really believe that they are that incompetent with these long lines? And once again, you know, and Dean Logan, who is the registrar over here, who's been accused of fixing an election in King County, Washington. When you understand and know the players, I guess your perspective changes. And I know who Dean Logan is, and he was, with a lot of evidence, accused of rigging an election years ago in King County. And he was hand-chosen, suggested by Padilla, picked by, you know, these guys on the Board of Supervisors to keep his job. But, I mean, we questioned him almost a year out. And, you know, he said that he would lessen the provisional ballots that went out there, and we saw more of the same. I went up to a room where they were counting provisional ballots, and they were everywhere. And we don't know if that vote's going to count. You know what I'm saying? So it's beyond me to think that if the Democratic Party, especially in Los Angeles, wanted to throw a transparent, fair, and accessible election where people aren't waiting 4 or 5 hours, you know what I'm saying, in line, and some people just can't wait on those lines. They see those lines and they're like, hell no. You know what I'm saying? And to me, that was a direct suppression of votes from Bernie Sanders.
I think first of all, it's not clear to me that actually disadvantaged Bernie. Because, you know, number one, I think, are there plenty of problems with the U.S. election infrastructure? Yeah. And we get evidence of that every time that people have to wait for hours on end in order to do something as simple as vote. But I mean, I think you'd need a little more evidence to establish that disadvantaged Bernie. But my impression was the reason why Bernie he might have lost California if there wasn't such an extended early vote period, because he got a lot of votes during the time when he was the national poll leader that were already locked in. So the same day votes, I think, skewed to Biden. So if you're telling me that people decided not to...
It's the opposite way around. It's the opposite way around. And that's just generally the way the elections go. Always your older voters are going to vote early. They're going to get their mail-ins out there, and it's going to always be more moderate to conservative. Almost in every single situation, it's really hard to, you know, the day of is always young people, you know what I'm saying, getting out there last second. They're not as...
What's the exact proportion, and how do we relate that to the Bernie versus Biden outcome? It's just like, I just don't see... I just don't see the intent behind whatever problems there were in California. And you know them better than I do, and I grant that they most certainly exist. I just don't see the intent as being, we got to take down Bernie. I feel like the California Democratic Party, of anybody, maybe not the leadership, but, you know, the rank and file and others.
Yeah.
They, and even some local officials, you know, I feel like they'd be much more willing to accommodate Bernie than most Democratic Party organizations throughout the country. So, like, why would they take these extreme tactics to suppress Bernie? It just doesn't really make sense to me.
Well, because here's why. Because all the establishment Democrats think they're morally entitled to win, so they don't care about fair elections or, you know, transparency. They'll do what they have to do to win. And, you know, that's what I see, you know, and once again, this is, like I said, this is my area where I talk to a lot of election integrity activists, and, you know, I study elections now, and we covered the LA election, and trust me, we went in those lines. You asked those people, who are you voting for? Bernie. There was nobody in those lines saying they were going to vote for Biden. You know, we went to 20 polling places. So, you know, we interviewed poll workers, and, you know, we interviewed poll workers who went through training classes, and believe you me, now they're having a brand new system, Michael. Brand new machines and everything. You know how many days of training they gave all their workers? 1 8-hour day. And we were screaming at them, like, you can't do this. You know, and I would even tell them, I open up restaurants. I need at least 5 days of training before I open up a restaurant. And that's nothing. You're going to throw people into a new system and you're going to give them 1 day of training? It's like they made sure that thing was broken on purpose. And the pizza lines. Everybody was getting pizza sent to them for, these lines where you can donate money and they'll send pizza out to people's in lines. It was ridiculous in Los Angeles, and once again, the provisionals. I mean, the way they ran this thing was it was like a banana republic, and nobody would answer the calls when we said there were problems, and I'm sure we can talk about it all day. I just wanted to present some motive to you today because a lot of people are saying that, well, Tracey doesn't believe that there's election rigging, what's going on whatsoever, that's even possible. And once again, I can't prove it to you that it's 100% rigging, but the irony of it is that you can't prove to me that it's right because we can't even properly audit it and look at it. That's how fucked up our elections are. And we need to get that out in the open. So,
well, I mean, there are some states where by statute they do have automatic auditing. Michigan being one example. I'm citing Michigan again just because it was sort of a pivotal state this cycle, and it was really central to people's outlooks and perspectives in terms of who would be the strongest candidate in the general election because of how Trump won it in 2016. Right. So Michigan is a state where there's an all paper ballot system, and they have an automatic auditing process. So maybe you don't trust those auditing processes. Maybe there are problems with them.
Yeah. Not for Michigan. No, there's a lot of shit going on in Michigan that I could tell you about. It would be too long of a discussion. But we have the head of electorates in Michigan telling people to turn off the default system on the machines, which take a digital ballot, take a picture of the digital ballot. You know what I'm saying? So voting is a private issue, but counting is a public issue. And they turned off the default settings, so there can't be a proper audit in Michigan. So that's one thing that has come to fruition. There are so many things when it comes to our election. We have to have a talk off the air, whatnot, and I got to show you some of this stuff. Not that I can't prove it completely because we don't have we have a serious transparency issue. And that means we have proprietary software and publicly funded elections that we pay for. So
yeah, I mean, it's just, again, it's just odd to me that California would be cited as the preeminent example of this when Bernie won California, albeit, by a lesser margin than maybe he would have wanted in order to accumulate a delegate lead. But he still won.
So but you're talking about you got to get to 15% viability. And there's no way in my mind that Joe would have even gotten to 15% viability and Bernie would have walked out of California with a serious dagger in the establishment's back. But once again, his fault is he didn't listen to the grassroots people for almost a year that was saying, hey, Bernie, you better get over here and stop this new system from getting certified because it's not going to help you out. It's not going to be in your favor. But I'm losing. Did you get all the super chats? They're already gone out of the window. We're going to keep going.
I just think there's stuff that I can prove that is provable, that is verifiable, that has all the evidence behind it, that to me are a little more warranting of attention in terms of how the campaign unfolded. That doesn't have to get into the speculative stuff. I mean, we can talk about the stuff that is a little bit more in my wheelhouse, that stuff that I feel I can focus on to better effect than getting into the speculative realm about rigging and stuff. I think that I thought that the 2016 primary was rigged in the sense that not having to do with vote totals being altered or anything, but just because of how early on Hillary was coronated, the superdelegate chicanery, right? How everybody, every Democratic Party official endorsed her well ahead of time, and they didn't even want a competitive primary in any respect, right? So to me, there's a reasonable way in which you could describe that as rigged, as well as the DNC merging operations with Hillary, having a fundraising sharing agreement with the Hillary campaign, hiding debates, Bernie campaign having to sue the DNC for access to the voter file, a lot of stuff like that, which in totality to me makes it reasonable to say that the primary was rigged, right?
Yeah.
But 2020 was different. It was much more wide open. The Bernie people spent 4 years getting rule changes through. They didn't get everything they wanted, but they got some in terms of diminishing the influence of superdelegates. Bernie, they couldn't black him out in 2020, right? He was too big of a political force. He got tons of media attention. There was no Bernie blackout in terms of the media. You might disagree with some of the media coverage or the slant, and yes, a lot of it was negative, in particular on some of the corporate outlets. But you know what? A lot of that's to be expected. I mean, there's nothing we can really do about that. Not every outlet's going to be a pro Bernie cheerleading outlet. Okay, so that's just nothing you can really.
No,
do.
I hear you. Well, listen, I think we both agree that there's motive, though, right? I mean,
say it again.
Motive. What you just stated, we both can agree. You know, I got some other questions, so I don't want to make sure we harp on this particular situation. But there's definitely motive there, right? I mean, you know, if a detective goes into a murder investigation, he's going to say, well, what is the motive for this person to kill them? You know what I'm saying?
Motive for what exactly?
For rigging. I mean, you said they were conspiring of sorts, so there is some motive to think that maybe they did some things with inside the machines to fix the election. I mean, the thing is, like I said, I can't prove it completely because I can't look at it. I can't even get a subpoena to look at it. But where there's smoke, there's fire in my mind. And I just think it's something. And surely I don't want to ignore the issues of the things he did wrong with the campaign because I know you're on top of that. And I read a lot of your tweets. But I think there is such thing as the perfect hurricane where it could be multiple things. And I believe the rigging was just a cherry on top to everything else with Bernie's bad campaign that he ran. So
I mean, I don't know. I think the motive is being overstated. Again, I do think there's. I mean, the reason why Bernie even bothered running for a second time because he thought he had a legitimate chance to win, and I think he did. I thought he had reasonably good odds to win, and that was because he had spent a lot of time making entreaties to the elements of the Democratic establishment. Remember, he had this unity tour with Tom Perez. He worked with Andrew Cuomo on things. He worked with Chuck Schumer on things. He made some inroads with establishment actors. And so
de Blasio.
De Blasio, supported him eventually. Although, I mean, de Blasio is kind of a dope now, as we know. So,
he's donkey.
Yeah. So I just think the motive is a little overstated. I mean, I think there is a world in which the Democratic Party has a little bit, I mean, its donor class is a little bit of a meltdown once Bernie becomes the presumptive nominee or something. And then after time, they figure out a way to accommodate him.
I hear you.
And so the motive stuff to me seems a little exaggerated, frankly.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to agree on everything. So, at what point did you make the pivot from Bernie to Tulsi, and then why? And what really attracted you most about the Congresswoman?
When you say pivot,
I don't know if that's the wrong words. I don't want to say that you were necessarily pro Bernie, but I think a lot of people have this thought process that Mike really never liked Bernie Sanders, and I don't know. I read your tweets, and I follow you, so I would have assumed that if Bernie Sanders beat Hillary Clinton in 2016, you would have voted for him over Donald Trump.
Well, yeah, I mean, I voted. Well, yeah, I would have, and I voted for Bernie in the primaries in 2016.
So yeah. What I'm trying to ask is at what point, because people see that you are very critical of Bernie Sanders. At what point was it okay, I don't think I can hang with this guy?
Well, it wasn't a matter of hanging or not hanging. I was critical of aspects of what Bernie was doing in 2016. It's just that he was the only alternative to Hillary in 2016, and so therefore the criticisms were less salient. And also, he was and in 2020 he was more of a behemoth politically. So there was more to criticize in terms of how he was exerting his leverage, how he was building up a network. Remember, he had unlimited funds essentially. I mean, he would raise historic amounts of money. He had universal name recognition. He was the runner-up with 46% of pledged delegates the last time, which automatically gives him a huge amount of advantages. So therefore, I think criticism is more necessary for a candidate who has those built-in strengths. Whereas with Tulsi, that wasn't the case. I mean, she was a relatively marginal figure. She was loathed by much of the party and the media. She had nobody who could, very few people, I think, who were competently defending her or were at least rebutting some of the more spurious criticisms of her. So I don't think I made a pivot, although it is the case that Tulsi's sensibility is a little bit more in line with mine than Bernie's.
The foreign policy?
Yeah, the foreign policy focus, the foreign policy emphasis, making that the centerpiece of her campaign is a little more akin to what I would naturally do. Also, she's not she's not bogged down in activist speak in the way that at least people in the Bernie orbit are. Maybe not Bernie himself, although he does sort of indulge in that from time to time. she is a little more reflexively skeptical of some of the superficial identity politics stuff.
Yeah.
I just find that I just find myself more in sync with her way of thinking on most things. It doesn't mean that I dislike Bernie. It's just that I felt that there was a role for me to really try to convey what Tulsi was about in a way that you weren't going to get from a lot of other sources. And also, I mean, look, she challenged the consensus in the Democratic Party on Russiagate, on impeachment. So she took huge risks around those subjects.
I love that vote, by the way. That was
me too. Me too. I'll defend that vote till my dying breath, probably.
I gave her a strike when she said she was for the impeachment process. I was so upset because, to me, the regime change candidate, the anti-regime change candidate, shouldn't be endorsing anything when the Democrats, who are so guilty of just carpetbagging in Ukraine, that she shouldn't stand behind that whatsoever, because at the end of the day, it was a regime change in the Ukraine propagated by the Democratic Party in the EU, and blood all over their hands, like people like Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi with Paul Pelosi, and Joe Biden. So that's why I was like, you better not stand for this impeachment. So when she retracted and she voted present, I was quite proud of her.
Well, I mean, she didn't really even retract. I was concerned when she voted to authorize the impeachment inquiry as well. But thinking about it more, because she at least on paper said that in theory, if the right case was made, if things were done properly, then she could conceivably support impeachment if the abuses of power were severe enough or whatever. And that sort of, and it gave her standing to then vote present and reject both the pro-impeachment side and the pro-Trump side. So I think, in retrospect, that was exactly the right move, or the right tack on her part. But I mean, you can go down the line in terms of the ways that she challenged orthodoxies within the party, just talking about FBI and CIA intelligence overreach writ large. She launched her campaign talking about that. Literally, that was in her first announcement speech. And then when Bernie allowed himself to be Russiagated, when he invited his own Russiagating, nobody defended him, including himself, other than Tulsi. And
that article in the Hill, right? That article in the Hill. I read that thing like 6 times. I thought that thing was people, read this here, because this is not a Cold War, another Cold War, a World War III rhetoric is awful. And Bernie Sanders and his whole team, and it just wasn't him, it was Nina Turner, Chuck Rocha, during Nevada, when they're having this historic, just huge win, they put their own foot in their mouth and they buy in and capitulate to the Democratic establishment narrative of Russiagate. I thought it was just awful.
Leah, let me turn a light on here because the sun's setting and I'm getting a little dark. 1 second.
Go ahead. Can you go into activity and look at the super chat?
Okay, there's a little more light. I'm not sure. What did Chuck Rocha and Nina Turner say at the time? I'm not even sure I saw that.
Well, they just kind of bought into the whole narrative, and even it's kind of they echoed what Bernie Sanders said. Mr. Putin, you will not interfere in our elections. And, Chuck Rocha, can you imagine we had a president that's looked at Putin in the eye and said, hey, man, you're not going to mess with our elections. He had the hat on when he said it. And, Nina Turner, she echoed the same sentiment. And I was like, you guys are just coming out of this thing with a big, historic, dominating
You're shooting
victory.
Yourself in the foot.
Right there.
There's no way for Bernie to win with that narrative ever. There never was from the beginning. And I said that the moment he started parroting it. And of course, nobody listened to me. So if I see Tulsi really taking a risk and going against the grain on that subject in particular, which, as you know, is one that I spent a lot of time covering every aspect of for years. She was the only politician of any stature who shared my attitudes toward it, because I'm not a pro-Trump reflexive guy either. They reject Russiagate largely for partisan reasons, although there are actually some intelligent, nuanced conservatives who can speak about it in a rational way. But
you mean the libertarian people?
Yeah, no, even some like paleo conservative types have the right perspective on Russiagate, but there are a lot of just reflexive pro-Trump people who don't like it because it was used against Trump, right? They don't even understand the details really. And they would, I guarantee you, jump on board with some kind of like reincarnation of Russiagate if it was used against a Democratic president, right? So they don't care. They don't have any principled opposition to it. It was just a partisan thing. But for Tulsi, it was different. And of course, she broadened that out into a new Cold War critique, into focusing on the existential threat of nuclear war. I thought over the course of the campaign, her critiques really sharpened. Like, she improved over the course of the campaign. She
certainly did
deteriorate, right? Which was really encouraging. She got more incisive. And for Bernie, would I vote for him in a primary if he was a viable candidate? Would I vote for him in the general election? Yeah. But I would have constructive criticisms along the way. Whereas for Tulsi, it was more almost interesting and invigorating because she was somebody who was, she's younger, obviously. So she's still, in a way, kind of formulating her political vision. Obviously, she has principles. But when you're running a presidential campaign for the first time, you're talking about a wider range of issues than you had previously. So it's a little bit more of a learning process, I guess. And to me, it was just a little more. It was more compelling, and not that I was ever under the illusion that she was likely to win the nomination. People always come back when I criticize Bernie. I always get trolls saying, "Oh, how's Tulsi doing, bro?" And just like, go find me the tweet or the article or the video where I said that Tulsi was likely to win the Democratic nomination. You won't find it. I think Niko did say some of that stuff, but I didn't. Because I had, I looked at, was there a black swan potential where something absolutely crazy happens and she gets traction and maybe wins a primary or something? Sure. I actually think she probably could have done better in New Hampshire than she ended up doing if they made a few different choices. But no, I was not somebody who was saying that she was going to win a majority of pledged delegates in the Democratic primary. Okay, my reasons for focusing on her and covering her so intently was because I didn't feel like anybody else could really do it. And I had the vocabulary to articulate what made her unique. And because I thought that the issues that she was bringing to the fore were extremely important, and the political sensibility, I think, that she embodies, where she's roughly speaking on the left, right? But she's not ideologically, she's not like an activist type, right? And she also has appeal among sort of maybe some conservative and libertarian populist types. So there's a fusion potential there within her political profile that maybe is something to think about in terms of the post-Bernie landscape.
Yeah. I think it's indicative of the way she builds a coalition within inside her movement. Like you said, it's got a lot of libertarians, a lot of anti-war, anti-interventionist conservatives on the right that just don't want to deal with Donald Trump, and they're looking for another alternative. And when she gets on the floor, even, something I want to kind of transition to real quick, her vote when she kind of presented the UBI, not only was it just one page and easy to understand this time out, but it had, people attached to it like Mitt Romney and Tom Cotton and, AOC and Ilhan Omar. So, it's this kind of let's go all over the place, let's do what we can do and just talk about issues. But what do you think about her stance on the CARES Act? More or less, what do you think about her silence about not calling out, Wall Street and the House and the Senate, who handed over this shit bill that just gives so much to the top? Because, often we would hear on the campaign trail, Mike, that, Bernie Sanders is great on domestic issues. Tulsi Gabbard's great on foreign policy issues. Right. But, if you look on paper, Tulsi Gabbard is not too far away from, Bernie Sanders on a lot of domestic issues, and she's actually, a lot better than people think. However, I feel that this time out, when it came to the CARES Act, that she was a little bit too aloha towards it, that she didn't call out the negative, issues with the CARES Act, and it was a perfect opportunity that was just missed. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think she genuinely does feel that the coronavirus crisis requires her to have a sort of a different attitude than she might have if she were still actively campaigning for president, right? Like she feels like she's a member of Congress. We're in an emergency situation. There's a role she has to play as the representative from Hawaii. It has an obligation to her constituents who are under duress and need various services, need intergovernmental help in terms of coordinating between state, local, and federal, that sort of thing. And she didn't, as an individual member of Congress, really have a whole lot of power in terms of how that package was created. So I think she's she's prioritizing.
I understand
what she chooses to prioritize, and I understand. I understand that. Would I like to hear something a little more vehement about the corporate bailout? I mean, she did mention it in when the bill was passed, but you're right that she didn't really lay down. She didn't campaign she didn't launch into campaign style mode aggressively. In a way, I kind of sympathize with Tulsi and Bernie, because I think that Tulsi really did intend on campaigning all the way to the convention, as she had said she was going to do, and then the coronavirus just upended those plans.
I get you.
And it's a similar thing with Bernie. I'm not sure he necessarily would have gone all the way to the convention if he was getting blown out state after state, including those that he won by overwhelming margins in 2016. But it's true that we're in this crazy situation, right? So they have to adjust, and those bills were a foregone conclusion because of Schumer and Pelosi and McConnell and McCarthy coordinating amongst themselves. And there's only so much you can do as an individual member of Congress. If she has to devote her energy to some of these emergency issues, then I get it.
I get it. But let me interrupt you real quick, because you followed her all around the campaign trail, and I mean, all you have to do is look at your Twitter, man, and follow guys like Matt Stoller. I mean, AOC is following all these people now. She's retweeting some of the people you follow, some stuff, and I know she had that little speech on the floor and stuff, but at least she had that, and I just thought it was a missed opportunity, because Tulsi Gabbard has the resources now and the information to get a hold of this and really kind of put a flag in the ground and stand, not, like I said, not being so aloha about the situation. I appreciated she introduced a one-page bill that was easy and clear to understand for people, and I'm glad she reached across party lines and showed, hey, that there's more than just Democrats that, want to get money passed for the people. But I don't know. I felt it was a huge opportunity missed here, Michael, that she should have really just called out what this bill is, because at the end of the day, we can't be myopic. Down the road, some people are going to really be screwed by this bill. I mean, I believe Stoller said on your show that this bill is worse than TARP, and there's no way of sugarcoating it.
That's fair. Again, I don't know how much she could have done as an individual member of Congress other than just doing public opinion. Public communications, maybe she could have done more of that. Maybe she will, as sort of the bill is implemented and some of its flaws become more apparent. It's a fair criticism, but then again, I can't help but sympathize with members of Congress who feel like under such extreme emergency conditions, they have to put their energy toward serving their constituents, using whatever means are available. So, I just try to, I don't think, I'm not going to run around denouncing people necessarily. I don't know how I would, what I would do in this situation. It's crazy and historically unprecedented. So, and she wasn't even physically in DC. She couldn't even physically get to DC for the vote.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Because Nancy told everybody to stay at home.
Yeah.
She was trying to do that unanimous consent vote, which is, I mean, after seeing Jimmy's show and then watching you with Stoller, and I don't know if you've seen my little Twitter, I put a little clip of you guys and music, a 2-minute clip, and you really should check it out, though.
Okay.
But it really was for me, I just really woke up because, Stoller said on Jimmy's show, enough is enough. People need to grow up and learn how to govern and understand what's going on that Senate floor and what's going on that House floor. And my dumb ass went and watched the House proceedings for 4.5 hours, and I'll never get that time back. That was really, really hard because it's really scary how alike all these members of Congress what they echo. It's just, nobody talks about the negative parts of the bill. Nobody talks about the money getting kicked up. They just sugarcoat it and tell people that help is on the way. And it feels like everybody's just pandering, and at the end of the day, we're going to get screwed. But,
yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. I think, yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. I don't know really what to add. I mean, I think, the entire political system essentially coalesced in favor of this as the emergency remedy. And therefore, we got to think about what it is about our political system which allowed a coalescence like that. And part of it, as Stoller talks about, is the leadership in both parties. But there are some deeper reasons there that, I don't know. I mean, Tulsi doing a couple of Twitter videos and tweet and like Facebook live streams and stuff. How effective would that really have been? I don't know.
It would have been effective for the future, I think, because that's my next question. I mean, she dropped out and endorsed Joe Biden. A lot of people know that, they just accepted the fact that it was a political move and she had to do it, that she signed on the dotted line. But, a lot of also, other Tulsi supporters out there say that, Joe Biden is like the opposite of what Tulsi Gabbard stands for. What do you think that lies in the future for Tulsi Gabbard down the road? And will this endorsement, even though a lot of people accepted the fact that she had to do it, do you think it will affect her negatively in the future?
Well, I don't know that it's the opposite of everything she stands for in the sense that she's a lifelong Democrat. I mean, some supporters try to project onto candidates based on their own desires. You have Bernie supporters doing that the same with Bernie, where they're shell shocked that he could drop out and pledge to work with Biden. Well, it's just like that's who Bernie is. Of course, he's going to work with Joe Biden and support him as the nominee. I mean, if you find it morally intolerable that Bernie would do that, then you shouldn't have supported Bernie in the first place because he was always clear that that's what he would do.
Yeah.
And actually, Bernie dropping out yesterday and expressing support for Biden as the nominee is exactly the same thing that Tulsi did. I mean, the conditions didn't really change in the less than 3 weeks from when Tulsi dropped out to when Bernie dropped out. As Bernie acknowledges himself now, the primary is effectively over on March 17th because since March 17th, we still have gotten no election results. We had the semi-primary in Wisconsin, but even then, there have been no election results that have been announced. So the conditions under which Tulsi dropped out on March 17th are the same conditions under which Bernie dropped out on April 8th. And their the reasoning was similar. It was look. The coronavirus crisis have changed our calculus, and we had to sort of modify our plans in certain respects.
Yeah,
and I think that's reasonable. So Tulsi was clear when she announced her campaign that she would be supporting the Democratic nominee. So that was one of her beliefs, her belief in the necessity of supporting the Democratic nominee. Therefore, it's not a contradiction of her stated beliefs because that was one of her beliefs. And if you didn't that belief, then you didn't need to support her. So I don't really view it as a contradiction.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's be honest though. I mean, she was the anti-regime change war candidate. We liked her more than anything because of her nuances in foreign policy. Whereas if Joe Biden on a stage, in one of the Democratic debates said that he wanted to move 75% of the naval force into the South China Sea. I mean, he's threatening World War III here. And then, that article we kind of reference about in The Hill, the way Tulsi said it's really, really bad to start fencing with these world powers and squaring off with them. And, I just think that, it is the opposite of Joe Biden in some ways. Yeah, she did agree to endorse the nominee, but a lot of people supported Tulsi Gabbard. The number one reasons are because of her foreign policy stances. And it just seems that Joe Biden is, the opposite, especially this time around. You know what I'm saying? It's, I'm scared when it comes to Joe Biden. Like I said, 75% of the naval force, he said he was trying to move into the South China Sea. I mean, that's threatening World War III here, Michael. So, I mean,
I think that what would be a contradiction if she became an unequivocal supporter of every single thing that Joe Biden advocates on the foreign policy front, even if it's conflicts with her stated convictions on foreign policy issues, whether it be regime change, whether it be these great power struggles with China and Russia. So if she abandons all her principles and supports initiatives along those lines just because Joe Biden is advocating them, then that would be a contradiction in my mind, and that would reflect poorly on her. But that's not really what I perceive her as doing. I perceive her as saying, as a Democrat who ran the Democratic Party, I favor the Democratic nominee over the Republican nominee. And that doesn't necessarily oblige her, nor should it, to be an unequivocal kind of sycophant for everything the Democratic nominee does. She says, I'm making a binary choice, and that's how she views it, between Biden and Trump.
Yeah.
And, I think there's, look, Trump is plenty of dangers too. I think it's a reasonable discussion in terms of who's going to be worse. I think there's a sound case to be made that Biden could potentially be substantially better, even notwithstanding all his flaws. I don't know. I'm going to reserve judgment on that until we're actually in the general election campaign mode for a while. But I don't think it's crazy to prefer Biden. I don't think it's crazy to want Trump out of office, to prefer the Democratic nominee over Trump. And that's what her position is. But again, if it morphs into just apologia or apologizing for everything that Biden does and says, even where it contradicts her own convictions on foreign policy in particular, then yeah, that'll undermine her credibility. But I haven't seen her do that yet, and I doubt she will.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I have a bunch of foreign policy questions that we're going to put to the side. I'm going to read some super chats because some people have asked you some things in here, and I want to get to you. So do you mind if you got a minute so I can run down some of these?
Yeah. Let's wrap up a little relatively soon. But we can go through some super chats. Yeah.
This is I'm going to wrap it up right here. And thank you for because you answered my last question. Who are you going to vote for? I guess you're going to wait on that, and we can talk more about that down the road. Redneck.
I'm an undecided voter.
Listen. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I appreciate the conversation. I hope we can continue it more, Mike. It was really an honor for me to meet you. I really like you. I think you're on point. I love your nuances and the way you explain things eloquently, and I'm a fan of yours. And I look forward to having you on the show in the future and seeing you out there once we get out of this coronavirus situation here, whatnot.
Yeah,
so,
I appreciate that. Yeah. It's very nice of you. It was good to meet you guys in New Hampshire. I don't know if Fiorella is angry at me for being overly critical of Bernie, but you can extend my apologies to her if that's the case.
I don't think she's mad. Fiorella doesn't really get mad at people. She has differences of opinion.
Right.
When it comes to this arena, she might not agree with you on everything, but I'm almost pretty sure she's not mad at you.
Okay. Yeah. And likewise for me, I like people don't find this hard to believe, but I don't get mad on a personal level with anybody if we have a disagreement.
No.
I get mad at you if like you're a jerk to me in like a private setting or something. But if we're having heated political debate or discussion, then not worth getting mad about.
I'm sorry she's not here today. You're mainly here with me because I'm a fanboy and I want to go one-on-one and dig deep. Okay, buddy? Yeah. So that's why you got me today. Sorry she's not here.
It's all right.
Redneck Economics says, I get it that it sucks to acknowledge the foundation of our democracy has been destroyed, but we'll never fix it if we keep denying the problem. Mr. Tracey, are you denying the problem?
What problem is this individual identifying? It's a little bit vague.
The foundation of our democracy, that it's been destroyed. In other words, our electoral system, you know what I'm saying? The fact that we did talk here today and like, hey, I can't prove it to you, but I think that we would have some agreement that the fact that it has to be fixed. No?
I would support measures to, modernize the election infrastructure in a way that has transparency and accountability. Sure. The bill that Tulsi introduced, the Secure Our Elections Act, seems like
the best one.
A good remedy for that. So yeah. That's fine with me.
On the last page, it acknowledges, and listen, I had two areas that I wanted to do two shows on Tulsi Gabbard. Number one, that she needs to go further into her bill and talking about open source and closed source and the whole process of suppression and everything that goes along with it. And number two, I thought she had to call out Joe Biden for not being fit for holding office. But then the very next day, she dropped out and endorsed, and we went on with that. But
right.
Yeah, her bill is definitely the best bill out there. So, I mean, once again, and I've asked her recently, and her stance is on elections. It's better than anybody else. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people are with her over Bernie Sanders, because they felt there was rigging, and he hasn't even acknowledged it. She's at least presenting some solutions to how we can fix it. So, yeah.
Yeah,
says Michael Tracey.
It's unfortunate that the conditions changed and she couldn't run all the way to the convention as she had originally planned on doing, because I think she could have come up with some more interesting proposals, and there would have been just more for her to do, but that's life.
Anthony Allen says Michael Tracey should stop playing with his hair, but I agree with him supporting Tulsi.
Maybe you're the weird one if you're worrying about my hair.
Jimmy Dore says I find Michael's hair twirling comforting.
Okay, is that the real Jimmy Dore?
That's the real Jimmy Dore.
All right, thank you, Jimmy. I'll twirl my hair even more dramatically if
it's comforting.
If satisfies you. Thank you. I actually need a haircut. That's why I'm twirling my hair, because there's too much of it.
Me too, and my barber's not going out. I told her to put gloves on and everything. Jimmy Dore asked, do you think that Jimmy Dore is the best show on YouTube, Michael?
No, I would say that there are some channels that have like old historical clips that I like that are a lot more interesting than Jimmy Dore. Although Jimmy Dore is pretty good. He's like in the top 5.
Gotcha. You hear that, Jimmy? Top 5. I think Jimmy went live, but who knows? Anthony Allen says, need rig-free machines to have oversight for elections. Ignore it if you can't prove it. And I think that is possibly the thing we've discovered today, is that we have to have a vessel to where we can prove it if it's rigged or not. I mean, I think we can all agree on that it should be open and transparent. And I think that's what we need to fight for, so that we can know for a fact.
I'm for maximal transparency, for sure.
Cool. Oz LaFave, he's in Washington. I don't know if you know the Bernie Crats up there in Washington. They're big fans of yours as well. Bernie would have cost the establishment trillions of dollars and power. They did everything to stop him and succeeded. Do an autopsy on this primary and tell me it wasn't rigged respectfully.
Okay. Well, I mean, I will have a significant amount of content coming out on the post-mortem of the Bernie campaign, so you can tell me whether you find it satisfactory.
We'll take a look at it. Listen, we got to talk some foreign policy, because I have so many freaking questions about foreign policy for you, but we don't have enough time today. We'll get to it again. Everything Revolution says, I'm from Tallahassee. Rigging has been going on for a long time. This guy's next paycheck is assured. Pat him on the back from men behind the curtain. I don't know about that.
My next paycheck is assured? Why? Because I'm like cozying up to the establishment. I wish they sent me a paycheck.
I'm still waiting for that check from Russia.
Yeah, I know.
A check from Tulsi.
I've been told that I would be getting rubles in the mail from Putin himself for years now, but it never seems to arrive.
Yeah, I got his personal vodka. It's beautiful. Patrick S says,
if anybody out there is in the establishment and you're listening to this and you want my Venmo or my PayPal information, get in touch and you can have it and you can send me money. I'll take it.
Patrick S says, couch party question? I'm like, yeah, we are having a couch party. I read economics. Mike Giaramita? It is. Oh, is it the other way? So that's it? That's all we got? Oh, we got another one right here. I'm so sorry. Here's the solution. Read Mike Gravel's 80-page book and organize for direct democracy / people's legislation. Kyle Kulinski is aboard. All Indian media should talk about this more and get involved.
I know of that book. I've talked to Mike Gravel about his proposals, but I haven't read it. But I'd be willing to read it.
Cool. And no more hair twirling. Too distracting, says Anthony Allen. I don't know. Jimmy Dore says keep doing it. It's soothing. One person says it's distracting. You're going to have to make a call on that, Mike Tracey. I don't know what you're going to do, but now you have a dilemma.
Again, if you're so distracted by hair twirling, then I think the problem lies with you, buddy.
That's great. So let's get you out of here. We had a long show today, man. I thank you so much for coming on. Do you want to tell us anything what lies in the future for Michael Tracey and what we can expect out of you, where any other places we can find you? When are you going to come over to Rockfin? All that good stuff.
Stay tuned. I mean, I'm always working on stuff. Writing a few things right now. I do pretty much nightly or every other night. I'll do a live stream of some kind on my channel. No, not a big production value because YouTube is still sort of like just a side project for me. It's not like my main identity. But people watch it, so I do it, and I enjoy it. And there's a podcast element there. And yeah, I mean, I'm just follow me on Twitter, and I'll keep you updated.
Michael, thank you so much for coming in. Last question: will Biden win? Yes or no?
I'm not going to make a definitive yes or no statement right now, but because that always comes back to bite you. But I will say is that, look, Biden has been underestimated for over a year now by, I'm sure you heard a lot of people in the online media world, left-leaning and right-leaning, say, oh my God, Joe's going to implode. There's no way he could win the nomination. You got to be kidding me. He's this decrepit old man. This is such a joke. Well, sure enough, he not only won the nomination, he won it in a rout. So does that tell you anything about his viability at all? I think it does, because the Democratic nominee is favored for some fundamental reasons. Trump is a weak incumbent. The economy's crashing. Trump hasn't consolidated the advantages of incumbency in the way that he might have if he had a better political strategy. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Joe Biden does have a reasonably good chance to win. And just because he slurs his words sometimes, yeah, it might be funny, it might make good memes, but what matters a lot more are the fundamentals of the race. And one thing I keep pointing out to people as a omen is in 2014, the 2014 midterms, right? The turnout plummeted to its lowest point since World War II. Sure enough, the Democratic nominee loses in 2016. 2018, turnout in the midterms surged to its highest since 1914, so over 100 years. And to me, that's a sign that the Democratic nominee is in relatively good shape if turnout is increasing by that margin. And we saw glimmers of that in the primaries pre-coronavirus, where there was big turnout compared to 2016, even surpassing 2008 levels in some cases, which was at the historic high. So all that is an indication to me that there is, maybe it's not all like strictly pro Joe Biden energy, but it's pro Democrat energy. Democratic people don't hate the Democratic establishment. Sorry to say, they don't share your and I views on the Democratic establishment by and large. I wish they did, but they don't. And a lot of anti-Trump energy. And if that gets directed toward Biden, then that's where it's going to go. And so I think Biden does have a reasonably good chance to win, or at least more so than people tend to think if you just follow online chatter.
Yeah, well, the mainstream media does a good job with their propaganda and lifting up guys like Joe Biden. Hey, thank you, Mike, for joining us today, man. I really do appreciate it. We had 90 minutes, had a good talk. So hopefully we'll see each other out there again, man. And stay safe and make sure you're stocked up for the quarantine.
All right. You too. I need some more canned goods, I guess. But, no.
Well, I'm going upstairs to cook, so All
right. Well,
if you were strapped over here, you'd be eating well.
Take an extra scrumptious bite for me of whatever you're making.
I will, Mike Tracey. Thank you so much again. That's Mike Tracey, ladies and gentlemen. He joined us today to talk 90 minutes of everything Tulsi, Bernie, politics, the race. We do appreciate his voice. Go over to his Twitter He's got a massive following over there, and subscribe to his YouTube too as well. I think he does a great job on YouTube, and he's continuing to grow his show there. So for Pasta Jardula, Johnny Sue, Michael Tracey's here. Thanks for joining. Combo out.